I don't think most people really understand how bail reform works. It's not, prior to bail reform, but how it works, this algorithm. Can you explain what the criteria are to that is determines whether somebody is detained or not detained, and what the process is, timing, and all that? Can you run through that a little bit for everybody so they can understand a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, and I'll do it sort of the Cliff's Notes version, but the way it works is this: you get arrested, a crime is committed, and the police are able to make an arrest. When that arrest occurs, there's a choice. You can put it on a complaint summons, which means you get a court date and you go. There's no jail time, or you go on a warrant. When that complaint is put on a warrant, you must go to jail at least for a night. Then the next day, ideally, or within a day or two, depending on if it happens on a long weekend, you're before a judge called the CJP court. In that CJP court, it's your first appearance. You're informed of what the charges are against you. You have counsel. And at that point, the state can make a motion to detain you, or you can be released in the spot with some conditions. Usually that happens before I get involved in the case, though sometimes I am involved in that process. If the state moves to detain, it's an automatic hearing, usually within 36 hours, I believe, but sometimes the next day, but within a day or two. And then at that hearing, we have to make a decision. And that's our first chance as prosecutors to explain to a judge and make our case to this defendant what our case is about and how strong it is. So one of the factors is going to be how strong is the case. Is there probable cause to begin with that the crime occurred and that person committed the crime? And then if so, should that person be released, which is for the vast majority of offenses, the default position. And the purpose of bail reform was to not have so many people held indefinitely in the jails. And then obviously, if we are going to move for detention, we must show that there are no conditions that will ensure that this person either won't pose a risk to the community, that they won't reoffend basically, or that they won't come, or that there's a condition that will ensure that they will come back to court. So the way that we do that is there's this algorithm that's run called the PSA. It ranks you on a scale of 1 to 6. And then there's a whole system called pretrial services. They take your scale of 1 to 6, 1 to 6 on new criminal activity, 1 to 6 on your risk of failure to appear, and pretrial services will make a recommendation to the court. And the court, they'll say this person should be released, they should be detained, they should be released with these sort of conditions. The conditions are put on a range of level 0, which is releasing your own recognizance, up to 3+, which is home detention. And for certain cases, you can get a bracelet for electronic monitoring. So that's the broad strokes of how the detention hearing goes. For these sort of cases, tailoring it to car thefts specifically, what I like to show is that it's a dual pandemic. We had COVID going on, but we also have a pandemic of car thefts going on. And often these are networks of individuals that if you take the different people out of the network, it ends up, it's like social distancing, right? It stops the spread of car thefts. But if you put too many people back into that network, the car thefts can perpetuate because now they're plugged back into the environment. In order to show that, I need to have evidence. I just can't say that. I need to show that there has been a pattern of activity, basically. And the majority of my cases, since I'm sitting at the state level, I have access through Major Williams and his team to the intelligence and to the reports from other jurisdictions to show, hey, this has been, you know what, in this one town, there was 4 car thefts within that one neighborhood last night, and look where that car came from. Well, there's a likelihood that this is 4 people going into that neighborhood. And we're able to sort of argue that, Judge, this is not just a one-off car theft, this is someone operating for profit. And if we can show that there's really a risk to the public that if this person's released, the judge will detain them, ideally, until the trial or a plea. But to go into what Assemblyman Thompson was saying too, part of the problem at the county level is that these are multi-jurisdictional cases at their core. I mean, you talk about Monmouth County, it's a shot down the parkway and back up. And we've had cases where they run out of gas in the parkway, yet they still end up getting a ride back home somehow. But it all depends on where you get arrested. So the problem is that if the guy gets arrested in Essex, because he's found with the car in Essex, they may not have, in this short time frame, the ability to get those reports from Monmouth County or from any other county, or if they went on a real tear, multiple counties. So part of the issue is just getting that information and having the ammunition when you go into that courtroom to make that argument that this person is not just they were caught with a car in Newark or East Orange or they got arrested in Caldwell. They were with multiple cars and multiple people throughout the state that day. But it requires, obviously, information sharing and quick access to that information.
So that raises a great point, right? So what is the time period to pull all that information together? What's the county prosecutor going to do? What do they have to do to be able to pull this information together? Because the criteria, you have this algorithm basically, right? And it's pretty straightforward. You know, what kind of crime? I'm assuming that a violent crime gets you more points than a nonviolent crime. A property crime, which is considered probably pretty low on that scale, correct? And
Yeah.
so when you look at this algorithm, there probably a lot of these car thefts come back pretty low to release somebody, home detention, something along those lines, right? Because just the nature of the crime and the way that this system is set up to scale it. Because quite honestly, the algorithm is set up to really just take somebody who's violent off the street, not somebody who's deemed to be not violent, correct?
Correct.
And so, so your success is because you have one entity that you're dealing with that has the ability to pull together all the information at one time, provide that to you, so you can make an argument that this is broader than just this one individual, and you can maybe get this point scaling up higher, correct?
Sort of. I wouldn't say we're trying to raise the point level, because that point level, you know, someone who has 3 prior convictions is going to have a higher number on that risk of reoffense than someone who has 12. But we also have to keep in mind that, you know, a drug addict is going to have way more convictions, more likely, just because of the virtue of arrests for drugs and, you know, certain petty crimes that might escalate that, whereas a persistent car thief might be only in the 2-3 level. And so to go to sort of where you're pointing, and what I like about the new statute that's proposed here is that a great resource for a county prosecutor is to look at, or even the state, is to look at your prior history. That's on the PSA, your prior arrest history is there, and the convictions and the sentences that you got. But when you see a receiving stolen property, it's a very general term. So that could be a stolen watch that you just happen to get caught with a, you know, a stolen Rolex. It could be for something silly, like, you know, people have taken video game systems from, you know, Walmart. You can't prove they stole it, but, you know, you have that system in the parking lot. It's a receiving. By creating that auto theft statute, at a quick glance, when you don't have time to react because you have to go within usually 24 hours of that first moment, you can see this person doesn't just have a history of receiving stolen property, which, to really confirm that it's a car, you have to pull all those cases, get those reports, get the judgment of conviction, make sure that it was actually a conviction for a car, not something else tied to that incident. Now when we see this prior history of stolen cars, I can go, judge, this is their 4th stolen car in the past 4 years. You know, when's it going to stop? And clearly that if this person gets back out, they're going to steal another car. It just helps create, in almost shorthand, a more accurate picture of what I would almost term as a career for certain people, as opposed to just crimes of pure opportunity where they just saw a car and took it across the street, basically.
Sure. So let me ask you this. When you, the information that they're gathering on the person's criminal history, right, is that based only on convictions or on charges as well?
It's based on both. Obviously, you know, a conviction is going to matter a lot more because that means that they've been adjudicated. It's a fact that they've done that crime. The PSA shows your arrests, whether it be a pending charge or sometimes they're unclassifiable because maybe it came from New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. But obviously, when we show they've been convicted of this offense, it matters. But it also matters to me walking into a car theft detention hearing. If they have 4 or 5 pending car thefts, that's incredibly relevant because now it's clear that the release conditions didn't work, that there is really no other condition that can be placed on this person besides detention to protect the public from their continued car theft pattern. But going back to the statute again, too, I think having that clear as day that it's a car, by saying it's a car, just matters a lot more because it doesn't require that extra digging to confirm what that receiving stolen property or what that theft conviction was for.
Sure, but to go back to the algorithm.
Sure.
Right? So when it's getting graded, do they grade on charges in the past or pleas or convictions in the past?
So I think I'm limited in my answer for that specific question because I'm not necessarily familiar with how pretrial services I actually consult pretrial services saying, hey, you know, it happens quite often. Hey, I have this person. There's another case that I know exists because I have it. It's my other case. Can you please rerun the PSA? And then sometimes they'll shoot back a response saying, you know what, that wouldn't affect their PSA score. So they seem to, I don't really know how the algorithm works at that level of specificity to give you, I think, an accurate answer to what you're looking for with it. But I think having more convictions would likely increase that.
Well, conviction's definitive, right?
Yes, it's definitive. They've committed those offenses.
So most likely that has a bigger impact on the algorithm than a charge, right?
Correct.
And we've said this a few times since this is I don't know how car theft shows up now as a property crime of some sort, so you don't know the magnitude of it. Could have stole I don't know a bag of candy from the drugstore, or could have stole a car. Correct. So if for the local prosecutors, they're unable to often gather this information because it's in various jurisdictions and then dig into it at that level. And so they're not going to be nearly as successful as you are when it comes to being able to get a judge to detain an individual who they've just arrested for car theft. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't say not necessarily. It also depends on the volume that they're dealing with and what the facts of their case are. Sometimes they have a great case and just comes across their desk, and you can make that very strong case. Judge, this is a great case. And when the case is strong, the odds of detention go up even higher because the judge can say, this is a strong case. There's a likelihood that you're going to be convicted of it. But
the algorithm, if I understand it correctly, the algorithm isn't really based on whether you're going to get a conviction. It's based on threat to the community, isn't it?
Correct. The detention
so you would
determination.
have to show that this individual is a physical threat to the community, not that you're going to prevail in court, but that they're a threat to the community, or that in the past of releasing them was unsuccessful because they continue to perpetrate the same crime over and over. Correct?
Correct. So the algorithm is going to look at just the on-paper criminal history, but another factor the judges can't only look at the algorithm. It's but a factor that they can consider, the results of the algorithm. The judges also looked at the case in general and all that goes with it. But I guess my point to having access at the county level to this information, it would bolster a county prosecutor who doesn't have the immediate access to multi-jurisdictional information to know specifically what this person's out-of-county history is. You can infer the CCH or the PSA is going to say they had a theft conviction between $500 and $75,000 value. Is that a car? I don't know. They can go pull the reports. They can try and discern it through some other means, but without having that immediate availability, you don't want to walk into the courtroom and tell the judge, this is a car thief, and it ended up being copper pipe thefts from 7 years ago. So you want to have accuracy when you're going to argue before a judge.
Sure, but a couple things with that, though. One, I don't disagree with you that having this bill helps in aiding describing what the crime is in the past, right? What they've been charged with or been convicted of that in the past. What I'm really trying to get at is we've had this 41% increase in 2 years with car thefts here in New Jersey, which, I think we can all agree that that's a pretty dramatic increase in a short period of time. And granted, it's very lucrative. A lot of things are very lucrative, but there's something that's driving this that you're having, as Ned said, people who are repeat offenders coming up. Law enforcement knows it, but somehow they're still getting back out there on the street. And this algorithm that we're dealing with, this is an opportunity. The car theft is just a glaring example of how ineffective it can be, the algorithm that's being used. Because my understanding, and I'm no criminal defense attorney, so that's not my my thing, but as a municipal prosecutor, I've read through it because I wanted to understand it, because believe it or not, and this was the thing about this whole bail reform and this algorithm, was that what I always thought was ridiculous was a guy who was driving a car gets pulled over for maybe speeding, and it turns out that he has child support obligations, will go to jail for 3 days before he's released, and then he's got to come to the municipal court in shackles and the orange jumpsuit and come up because he didn't pay his child support, and he's perp walked in and the whole thing, right? Meanwhile, we have people who are stealing cars and they're getting out in less than 24 hours. It just doesn't seem right? So there's something with the way that this goes, and my understanding was that the judges were maybe not formally instructed, but maybe encouraged not to override the algorithm, because then we would get impact disparities, which could be perceived as being prejudicial in some way, right?
I'm sorry, Assemblyman, you're going a little far afield. Could we kind of
we're
stay
talking
focused
about
on
we're
auto-
talking about how this all comes together, and I
No,
think
but you're talking about bail reform, which is fine. I mean, I agree. There are
But
that is something that needs to be considered.
Mr. Chairman, that's a great, thank you very much, because what was said earlier is we're talking about a small group who's committing a tremendous amount of crime.
That is correct.
And how does this small group keep doing it, right? And either law enforcement's not acting properly, or these people have the opportunity, even after they're arrested, to continue to perform these crimes over and over, to the point where we have a 41% increase in car thefts. And I got to tell you, this issue, and I want people to understand this issue. Look, I live in some place, like, this isn't really an issue where I live, right? But I got to tell you, I have she's going to be 90 years old, and I probably shouldn't have said that in public, but my mother, who lives in Cherry Hill, has to worry about being carjacked. Now, she's not driving a $100,000 car like Ned, but she gets, right? That's what you're driving, because that's why you're here, worried about this, right? So she gets one of those alerts on her phone when she's when she's going to an event in Cherry Hill, right? We're not talking crime capital of New Jersey or anything. It should be a pretty safe place. And she's getting, hey, when you go over to the community college to listen to this talk, be very careful because there's been carjackings in that intersection or that area. And that's no way for people to live. And it's about time that we protect the law-abiding citizens. And we look at these problems that we have that got us to this 41% increase in 2 years by a small group of people who keep performing it over and over and over. And the point that I'm trying to make, Mr. Chairman, and the point that we really need to discuss, and I'm glad some of these issues came out about the multi-dictional problems and the time frames that are put on prosecutors at the local level, at the county level, to be able to get this information together to show that this person should be detained, versus the algorithm that is going to let them out pretty much every time. And it's a matter of resources, and this bill gets us there. But this bill isn't going to be the end-all, the save-all, because there's other crimes that are just that this is the same problem. And this one's the one that's being highlighted because this is a big issue, right? When you see cars of this magnitude and this happening. So what we really need to do is we really should be having a hearing on bail reform, and we should really dig in deep into this algorithm, because quite honestly, every person on this committee should understand that algorithm in and out, because we never had a say about how that algorithm was put together, and that's our job. And we really need to understand it and see if it's really protecting the people. And my point of view, looking at these results, 41% increase in 2 years, it's not protecting anybody. I do have a question for the Major. You said something, it just caught my, my attention. A lot of these fancy cars, I don't drive a fancy car, they have the key fobs. They won't operate without them. Short of people leaving them in their car or them breaking into their house, how are they stealing the cars?
So there's technology that can beat that system, but most of what we see is the crime's opportunity, the key fobs in a car. There are devices that can emulate or could steal if you're close enough proximity to a key fob inside a residence or anywhere else. If you're close enough, you could steal it. It is a advanced technique that we don't run into very often.
So these are really crimes of opportunity. They see an opportunity and then they're taking it. And just one last question. How many of these car thefts are done through carjacking? Because I never thought about the key fob part of it.
It is it's smaller than, we used to have a carjacking problem 15 years ago in the state. It is up a little bit, but it's not where we were by any means. So most of it, crime's opportunity. So in some towns, Clifton, New Jersey has more of leaving the car running because they have a lot of strip malls in locations than say a more suburban area where it's the key fob in the vehicle or in a close proximity to, like, in the first area of the residence. But again, most of the time they look for the mirrors in. That means that or mirrors out, I should say. That means that the key fob's still there or the car's not locked.
Oh, interesting.
It's just an indicator that the thieves do use to see which ones are the ones they want to approach. I found that high-end motor vehicle theft. I'm sorry, Assemblyman. It was on the back of one of my papers. But so total high-end thefts. Can I do this? I'm sorry, just real fast. 3,903 is what we this year. 2020 was 2,186. So. 2022 through November 30th, it was 3,903 high-end motor vehicle thefts. In 2020, at the same time, it was 2,186. 21 was 3,183. So, apologize for that. 21 was 3,183. The ones that are proposed?
Yeah, the proposed bills, the one that's going to break out car theft and receipt of stolen property also has a persistent offender sentencing provision. This speaks to exactly what you're talking about. It's not the pretrial release so much as the conviction. If you routinely commit theft after theft and you're serving a probation or a short jail sentence, I think to some extent the bail reform question is like a side issue. More important is if someone is a persistent auto offender, they steal cars and they're not going to jail, you need a sentencing provision that's going to allow an outcome that when they are convicted of the conduct of which they're accused, they don't just get probation, they actually serve time. And that's what the persistent offender provision will do, and one of the bills being considered today. Also, it does come into play in the pretrial detention argument in that if there's a more serious consequence that you're going to go to jail, there's a greater argument that there's greater incentive not to show up in court when required. So I think that will help quite a bit. That I think is exciting to us that bill is being considered today.